I invite Dr. Pramila to summarize, and then I invite Dr. Sujata Bhatt to kickstart the discussion session, inviting all the other chairpersons and the faculty. Over to you, Pramila, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Asmita, for that excellent learning and teaching session. I don't know how many postgraduates are hearing this. It was a really wonderful session for them. And I'm sure many of those CTGs where you have waited, you had done the intrauterine resuscitation, and then finally managed to deliver a healthy baby vaginally, many of them would have gone for cesarean in some other center. So I'm sure it was an excellent session for postgraduates. So, what I want to specifically say is that she has never resorted to fetal scalp blood sampling or anything which is not available to us. She has used all the things which are available to us, which we can practically do. So make sure you all follow this. And I think by learning further, we will be able to get a good result. And one thing I think I specifically liked when she said is about that contraction part, because many a time our PGs, when we call us, madam, there is a dip. When we go and see, it is actually hyperstimulation. So just by stopping that oxytocin, it is going to get reverted. They don't look at that bottom part and how many contractions are there, whether it is due to hyperstimulation. That part they are not many times seeing. So that is very important. And regarding the fetal heart location also, I think many, what they do is they use this large probe to locate the fetal heart. And many times they might be placing the probe actually on the opposite side of the fetal pack, because since this is a large probe, it will be anyway conducted to that side, and your CTG quality is going to be not that good. And so always make sure you use your stethoscope or a Doppler to find the actual location of the fetal heart, rather than depending upon this large probe of the CTG machine to find out where is the fetal heart is. And I think all the other aspects madam has already covered. Always look at the clinical scenario. Always read the CTG based on the clinical scenario. Don't jump and do an unnecessary cesarean section. And I think that's all. Thank you, madam. Thank you for that excellent session.
So Dr. Asmita, actually, out of your 10 cases, there were a few with fetal tachycardia. So I just want to also stress on the point, like Dr. Pramila said, locate the fetal heart and make sure you've got the right beats. You have to locate even, check the maternal pulse also to make sure that the fetal heart and the maternal pulse are two different things that you are listening to. Then point 2, your case number 9 had decelerations. So I just wanted to convey that it's so important to see how soon the deceleration picks up again and goes back to the baseline, because that case had shallow decelerations. Now, shallow decelerations, even I don't think we can wait for a long time in shallow decelerations, because it is more significant. And you did the ARM, and as you said, it was thick meconium. And then you said cesarean, but in between you said you did the digital fetal, the scalp stimulation. Was that necessary before your decision for the cesarean? Were you keeping that as a point to decide, or was it much earlier? Because that case had a lot of negative points to say wait further with some more features. Then, of course, the importance of the admission test was already wanting to, Dr. Shamla wanted to discuss that, and we wanted Dr. Uma's opinion on admission test. So let's start somewhere, maybe with your shallow decelerations first. I just wanted to know about that case.
Thank you, Dr. Sujata, for those comments. That patient had shallow decelerations, but she was only 4 centimeters dilated at that point. With thick meconium, we always have sort of an apprehension about the meconium aspiration. And we do use digital fetal scalp stimulation because it's simple to do. And if you see an acceleration, probably it gives a sort of a reassuring that we can wait. In this case, we did not wait because it was if she would have been 7 or 8 centimeters dilated, probably, and a reactive fetal scalp stimulation, we might have thought of probably continuing the CTG monitoring because the decelerations were shallow. But in this case, she was in an early part of a labor, meconium was thick, and digital fetal scalp stimulation is one of the factors which you add on to your clinical picture. Like we don't do cesarean only based on CTG, we don't do cesarean only based on the fetal scalp stimulation. this test is not very widely used and it's not very widely validated in many of the populations. So we had some of our research projects where we used it with intermittent auscultation and we did find it useful. So we use it as one of the factors, but we don't base our decisions on the fetal scalp stimulation. And now the NICE guidelines also say that whenever you decide to wait for with the decelerations in a CTG, you should do the fetal scalp stimulation when you don't have a fetal blood sampling facility, so that you can take it into account as one of the factors while making your clinical decision, not based on only one test.
Yes, I guess it's reassuring. Yeah.
Uma, any comments you want to make?
No, I completely agree. Of course, and this is something we tell our juniors also, that if you are doing, because when you see a decelerating trace or a deceleration and you are anyway going to do a pelvic examination, see what is happening to the heart rate. Or if you hold the head even with a pelvic grip to see how much has gone in, even that stimulation, you can see a reaction to the fetal heart. Obviously, we are not going to base our decision only on that, but if the baby is having its ability to accelerate its heart rate, then it gives us that much of a reassurance.
Yeah, it's basically reassuring, yes. And about the admission CTG, Dr. Uma?
Yeah, so the admission CTG, I think, is something that we all do. We all do a trace when the woman comes in. Though there were initial papers on the admission CTG saying that it is valuable, subsequent papers have not shown that it is something that helps improve outcome. So I think what is it does, we do it because it gives us a reassurance that this baby is okay. It gives the couple the reassurance that the baby is okay. And at least at some point, if for some reason problem happens, we have a documentation that there were accelerations and this baby was fine to begin with. Pre-induction, I think definitely it makes sense to do, because sometimes we have seen decels on sporadic decels on a trace, pre-induction in a low-risk woman, and you are not going to immediately give prostaglandin, etc., to stimulate if you're seeing unprovoked deceleration. So to that extent, I think it makes sense. I think we shouldn't be falsely reassured or by an admission test which was done, say, 8 hours earlier, 12 hours earlier, and then subsequently something can go wrong. So it gives us that much reassurance that the baby was okay then. It may not ensure that everything will still continue to be okay by the end of the labor process. So that is its limitation.
And one more thing on a CTG, I think it had already been mentioned, the speed, because interpretation and the speed is a big difference with 2 minutes, 1 minute. I mean, 1 centimeter per minute and 2 centimeters and 3 centimeters trace.
Ashmita wanted to say
Yeah, can I add a point? One regarding admission test, I think there are no grade A recommendations regarding the use of CTG, and evidence is not convincing. So it essentially depends probably on an institutional protocol. The high caseload institutions like us, where we have 40-50 deliveries per day, we probably can't do CTG admission test on each. So our policies, usually we do it only for high risk cases. And yes, I agree with Dr. Uma, pre-induction. Yeah, that's important, because the moment we make a decision to induce, she is in high risk. So we do CTG at that particular point and then restart when she goes in active labor. There is something which we practice, which has to some extent reported in literature, but not very well studied, is an intermittent CTG. Like we have so many patients in labor and number of CTG machines which we have are limited. There might be 10 patients in labor at a time and I have only 4 machines. So what we try to do in such situation, that every 2 hours we attach CTG for half an hour to the patient, take a trace and then sort of rotate the CTG machine. It's a very complex situation because labeling the CTGs, patient identities, everything becomes difficult. But intermittent CTG also is found to be associated with a reasonably good outcome as much as the continuous electronic monitoring in some of the studies. Okay.
Yes. I think many of us do intermittent because everyone doesn't have enough of machines to cater to, all the patients admitted.
Uma madam, have you got any experience with this wireless CTG machine where the patient can be ambulant?
Yes, we do
Madam, we
have.
are sorry, we are government institution, do not have it yet, but I think that will be a brilliant idea to have wireless CTG. Because one of the problems with maintenance of CTG machines in a busy hospital with changing staff is so many times the probes are mishandled and broken. So if you have a wireless CTG, probably that will make it much simpler and easier. I don't know about the any studies if we have in wireless versus with wire CTGs. I have no experience.
Yeah, I
Madam, have
have
you
used a
experienced?
wireless CTG. The pickup is quite good, the variability is quite good, but it's all Bluetooth enabled. So some of these modern CTGs, which are wireless and digital, you have some where the digital trace is stored and you can then actually WhatsApp the digital trace instead of taking a printout and then taking a photograph. It's all very convenient, but it is not practical in a high volume institution because these Bluetooth devices have to be charged. So even in our center, once it happened that the nurse forgot to charge the thing and then they put it on and they couldn't hear the effects and everybody was panicking. So these are things that can happen. I'm saying it in a lighter vein, but it is important. So they have to understand that Wi-Fi or Bluetooth has to be available, etc. But yes, from a patient comfort perspective, I think wireless CTGs are good. More importantly, that the newer machines give you a maternal heart rate as well as the fetal heart rate, and I think those are very good investment because we have repeatedly heard that it's important to distinguish the maternal heart rate from the fetal.
Uma madam, I got a question for you. But before that, Dr. Ashwati, can you just check in that delegate box if there is any queries come in that the other link? Because we've got enough time to discuss, we should take up that also. Dr. Ashwati, can you check in that
Yes.
link?
I am checking. Right now in the chat box,
Yeah.
there are no questions, but as
Okay.
soon as they come up, I will be putting
Okay, thank you. Madam, can you just elaborate a little bit more on this physiological interpretation of CTG? Isn't that what we were doing? What we were all doing till now? What is the basic difference? Because we were all interpreting it based on the patient's characteristics and what to expect. We were doing this, isn't it? So what is the basis of this physiological interpretation?
So I think the physiological interpretation of CTG actually is something that that has been published from Edwin Chandraharan and his group, where they are talking about basically interpreting the CTG trace without the use of blood sampling and saying that if you have understood the physiological interpretation and you see that there is whether there's good variability, whether there is no change in baseline. So there are a few points. So they've analyzed cases where there have been problems and gone back and have done it in a systematic manner and made a publication of it. So essentially, it is the same principles because the physiological interpretation doesn't change. It's the same thing that we have followed all along, but it's a systematic way of documenting that interpretation and saying that is this baby likely to be hypoxic or not, and then because they have the outcomes, they have correlated and said how good that interpretation is in picking up those problems.
And ma'am, how reliable is this fetal scalp blood sampling in presence of meconium?
So I actually have no experience with fetal scalp blood sampling. It's not something that we do. But per se, presence of meconium does not change the scalp pH because you will clean the scalp and put the paraffin off and then so it should not be.
Would you wash the area of the scalp?
Actually, can I add here one thing?
Yes.
Yeah. Regarding meconium and fetal scalp sampling, the recommendations say that actually fetal blood sampling, if you do in case of meconium, there will be a change towards the basic, because of the contents of the meconium, the intestinal tract. It's going to give a false assurance for us. So fetal blood sampling in case of meconium is not recommended, and it doesn't get an appropriate result. That's what the recommendation says. So, and otherwise also in Indian setups, I don't know how many of you are doing fetal blood sampling, but we are not doing it. So our most of our decisions are clinically oriented, and overall holistic view of the patient is taken, and along with the CTG. So if it's a thick meconium and if she's 4 centimeter dilated and we are not having an assurance she's going to deliver within the next maybe short period of time, then we will take her for cesarean delivery. But if she is like 8-9 centimeter dilated and thick meconium, she's pushing, or we find that she'll be delivering, and some reassurance is there that the reactivity is there, then we'll probably go for a vaginal delivery. So that way we interpret, and fetal blood sampling is not practiced in our center at least.
I think they are doing it routinely in Fernandez Hospital. All over the trainees who come from Fernandez after the same, they are doing it routinely for all
They
patients.
do lactate there routinely, but I
Lactate
don't
is
think
added
that
then.
the unit is doing. But I feel, no, so I agree
Are
that
available, no?
contamination. I feel that it's important to document at least 40 HR at first.
Yes.
But
That
that
is
will
not-
help us.
Yes, and Dr. Pramila, I mean, I know you said we all are already practicing the physiology part, but I feel, especially your junior consultants, I think it is very important to regularly have these meetings, because each time you have a new junior consultant joining, they all should be aware not to panic at the first deceleration. So I think regular classes and making sure everyone is updated about this physiology is important, because it does make a difference learning more about the physiology.
Madam, I had a query from the audience side to both Rathod ma'am and Uma ma'am. Earlier, there was a discussion on how to set the speed for the CTG trace. It could be either 1 centimeter per minute, or it could be 3 centimeters per minute. And in the discussion, the trace that was shown, that was set at 1 centimeter per minute. So, ma'am, is there, from your experience, do you find 1 centimeter per minute better, or 3 centimeter per minute better for a better interpretation of the trace, and so that the variability is picked up easier in a 3 centimeter, or is it 1 centimeter per minute?
As we are concerned, we use only one speed, and there is recommendation that any institution should choose whatever they want to do. It's not the interpretation changes, it's that what you say, the way in which the visual impression which is done, the perception of your healthcare workers who are interpreting CTG changes. All paper speeds are reasonably enough as far as interpretation. There is no evidence which says that 3 centimeter per minute is better than 1 centimeter per minute as far as the outcomes are concerned. At our institution, we use 1 centimeter per minute for the simple reason of a logistics, that we don't want a huge amount of paper strips to be stored and consumed. I'd like to have experience of others if anyone is using 3 centimeters.
I think we also use 1 centimeter per minute. Once you're used to that 1 centimeter per minute, if you see a 3 centimeter trace, you will think that variability has reduced. So as I said, it's a lot to do with pattern recognition, and Ashmita also emphasized the other important reason why we all do 1 centimeter per minute is because otherwise we'll be wasting a lot of paper. And these papers are sometimes hard to get as well. So I think 1 centimeter per minute is what most of us use. Most literature books that you read, the traces will be 1 centimeter. So to that extent, because those patterns are kind of familiar with us, I feel the interpretation becomes more reliable because we are more exposed, not because 3 centimeters bad. I think in the US, a lot of people use 3 centimeters per minute. but it's not a paper speed that we are used to.
I brought this forward, ma'am, because if someone is used to a 1 centimeter trace, and then they are saying, as you said, a 3 centimeter per minute trace, a deceleration that lasts for less than 60 seconds, it is actually shallow and it is picking up on a 3 centimeter trace. It looks huge. That is, there may be a sudden mistake in interpretation if there has been a change of settings. So I think that is a very valid point because that had been highlighted earlier. Something that looks like a huge dip that is lasting for a long time may be actually an error in the time setting. So if we just check the time, then we may be able to, the setting, if there is no error or not.
And
Because
I
I
think one
saw
thing we need to remember that paper speed, it's not only the contraction or its shallowness, the uterine contraction also will be equally prolonged. So if we put the correct perspective of matching the fetal heart deceleration with uterine contraction, paper speed becomes immaterial. It's just a matter of what you are familiar with.
Dr. Kiran Sinha was asking which paper speed is preferred. I think the one that we are used to. That is what the consensus was.
Yes. So I think actually even this storing the CTG strips is so important, and like since it cannot be stored over here for too long, it's always better to enter the findings even in the file, as Dr. Uma mentioned, both on the trace and the file. All the findings in case she's taken up for a cesarean because of a pathological trace.
The only other point to emphasize that there are no questions is
Can I make a query here regarding the practice of photographing from the screen and sending it to you for interpretation? So nowadays, sometimes we find that the paper is not there, the resources and all those problems. So we have residents, taking the photograph from the screening and sending to you on WhatsApp. So anybody has this kind of practice in their setups, and what do you think of it?
It's better to see that trace than to give her an opinion on the phone without seeing anything and just listening to what that person is saying. It's better to see it yourself before you say something. So, yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Ma?
because it's a very short, small part. They will send you, just the deceleration or something which you can't actually interpret properly. But there have been instances of this happening off and on, that you do have some WhatsApp group where all laboring patients, the information is shared, and many a times you do get such kind of queries from your juniors regarding what to do next. So basically, again, we have to reiterate that the holistic view of the patient, the clinical findings, and the CTG has to be interpreted together instead of just looking at the one small finding of the deceleration. That is what I think Asmita ma'am also has tried to give the message.
So, Suveka, I think that's a very valid point. And if I can just add, when you take so if you're taking a screenshot of a CTG from a monitor, that means you're using an electronic system, not a traditional CTG where it's automatically coming out on paper. So in those situations, where it's not the decelerations that will be so much of a challenge as change in variability, because the way it is on the screen, based on the angle in which they take the glare, sometimes you may not interpret the variability very well. And one of the most sensitive features of picking up a hypoxic fetus or a fetus that's getting trouble is a shift or change or loss of variability. And somehow I find that that is best captured when you print it. If not, it is better, those machine systems which allow a direct WhatsApp from that system, then you get it with the grid. So it's easy for us to interpret. Whereas when you take a shot, sometimes you just get it without the grid at the back. So you are not able to actually interpret variability. That was my additional comment to, of course, the length of the script, etc. The other point I wanted to emphasize is the difficulty when there is second stage. So in some of the cases, like Ashmita mentioned, second stage, when the woman is pushing, very often the probe is taken off, and that period can be as long as half an hour. So I think it's important that we continue to monitor the fetal heart rate. So any suggestions or recommendations like that?
Yeah, and in second stage, you have the end stage deceleration. So it's important to see the maternal pulse at the same time.
Thank you,
Dr. Ashwati, you're muted. Huh.
Asmita, would you like to answer Uma Madam's question?
What?
Sorry, I did not hear it properly, Dr. Uma. What was the question? It's raining heavily
In Delhi.
Delhi, so probably the network is breaking in between. Can you just?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it wasn't so much a question as asking your comment on difficulty in second stage monitoring when the woman is pushing, because often there's loss of contact and sometimes people just take off the probe, and that's a vital half an hour or 40 minutes, and then sometimes you're surprised that the baby's flat.
Yeah, I think that's a genuine problem, and it's just we manage it in an individualized way, and probably we resort more to an intermittent auscultation more frequently in between the contraction, because putting the probe with head too deep in pelvis doesn't really give good signals. And so we resort quite frequently to the intermittent auscultation in that situation. But I agree, it's a difficulty in getting a good quality trace in second stage. That is a problem. And we don't have an internal electrodes or a scalp electrode. We don't have availability, so we don't use them. So I have no experience with the scalp electrodes, how they do in second stage. That might be a probably better option because they don't get much misplaced during that phase.
I had a query. This is regarding, again, another take on what Uma Madam was asking. Especially during second stage, we keep the monitor, and then even if the monitor is in place, because the patient is moving and often the probe gets dislodged, it looks as if there is a dip going down and then we never see it coming back. That was what Madam was talking about. How important is the second stage CTG monitoring medico-legally? Because all this is, we are keeping this recording, especially in situations that are going to go wrong, and often in such a situation where we are going to do assisted vaginal delivery for fetal distress, we may not be able to get a reliable trace. So we want it be according to your experience, madams, how important is it medico-legally? Won't we be able to explain it clinically that we have been doing intermittent auscultation between each contraction and we had heard the fetal heart? The CTG, we were not able to keep, or it was unreliable. So isn't our clinical explanation enough to save us in such a situation?
I think it would be, provided we have documented everything clear, okay, and provided we have a trace which looks completely normal at the last point where the CTG was taken off. Now, if you have a trace, let's say an hour or 1.5 hours ago, because we have been doing either intermittent CTG or she was a low risk mom or whatever, 2 hours ago you have you have a trace which is looking good, and 2 hours later you can't say that that trace meant that this baby will be fine. But if you have a trace, say half an hour earlier, where it was good, that it was reactive or reassuring features and a normal trace, and then you document then and there that the CTG probe was not picking up because of change in maternal position, whatever, and therefore we resorted to intermittent auscultation, and this was the rate, and this was the time frame in which we applied the instrument or delivered the baby. Then you have told the story in a sequential fashion. The problem that happens is very often somebody who's writing the notes, there's a long gap. There'll be one CTG trace and then there'll be one full dilatation, partogram ends there, and then there is the delivery. So the partogram has something, the delivery notes has only the delivery notes, and therefore someone will ask what happened in between. So if you're able to write a cohesive story then and there and explain these are the difficulties, I don't think that is a problem. There are many experts who can give their take on this situation, but this is very common. So I think the importance of documentation and how we put it down is what will help us in these situations.
Dr. Ashwati, I think we have reached the end of the discussion part.
So we have had the first session on monitoring the passenger, on interpreting and understanding CTG and how to practically apply it. We are winding it down, and then it is slowly time for us to move on to our second session on monitoring the passenger, which will be what is beyond CTG. So let us wind down and start the next session. I invite the chairpersons, Dr. Kiran Sinha, to introduce the first speaker. Dr. Kiran's CV slide.